Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into a truly fascinating ancient narrative, Genesis chapter 21. On the surface, it might appear to be, a complex family drama, but beneath those layers, it reveals profound spiritual truths, insightful historical contexts, and yes, even unseen battles that reverberate through time. It's a story woven with long-awaited promises, difficult choices, and unexpected divine intervention that absolutely changes everything.
Yeah, it's captivating. What's truly fascinating here is how this narrative, originating from millennia ago in a vastly different culture, continues to speak directly to our modern struggles. We'll explore everything from personal faith journeys and the profound challenges of waiting on a seemingly silent God to the complexities of societal conflicts, and even those subtle, unseen spiritual forces that are constantly at play in our lives. Our mission today is to thoroughly explore the allegorical, historical, and spiritual dimensions woven through this incredible account.
Okay, let's jump right in. We start with what is, without a doubt, one of the most anticipated moments in the entire Abrahamic narrative, the miraculous birth of Isaac. The story opens with just this resounding affirmation of God's faithfulness. After decades, literal decades of waiting, the Lord did exactly what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant, and she bore a son to Abraham in his old age, precisely at the time God had said it would happen.
And the timing is just incredible.
Think about that for a moment. Abraham was 100 years old, and Sarah was 90. He named his son Isaac. And just 8 days after Isaac was born, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded, marking him as a child of the covenant.
Right.
This wasn't just, a happy family event. It was the ultimate culmination of everything they had been waiting for, a divine exclamation point on a promise that seemed humanly impossible.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Isaac's birth, especially at their advanced ages, wasn't just a biological miracle. It was a public, undeniable testament to God's raw power and his unwavering commitment to his covenant promises.
Yeah, undeniable.
It completely defied all natural expectations, didn't it? It shattered human limitations and demonstrated a God who actively intervenes in human history, proving that with him, well, all things are truly possible. The sheer improbability of it just underscores the divine hand at work. And the circumcision on the 8th day, that wasn't just some cultural rite they went through. It further solidified Isaac's inclusion in this divine covenant. It was a physical sign of an unseen spiritual bond that irrevocably set him apart as the legitimate heir of God's promise.
The heir.
It was the fulfillment of a prophecy that would span, a quarter of a century?
Yeah, 25 years. Now, here's where it gets really interesting when we think about the historical and cultural context of Abraham's time. In the ancient Near East, having a son wasn't just nice, it was absolutely essential. For a man's legacy, the transfer of inheritance, and even a woman's identity and status within her society.
It's crucial. Absolutely crucial.
Without a male heir, a man's name could literally just die out, and his property would be dispersed outside his lineage. And for a woman, barrenness was often seen as a curse, wasn't it? It brought immense shame and distress because it was believed to indicate divine displeasure.
That's right. Children, especially sons, were viewed as blessings, ensuring the continuation of the family line and the preservation of ancestral lands.
So it went way beyond just personal desire.
Precisely. This wasn't merely about emotional fulfillment. It was the bedrock of their entire cultural and social existence. The firstborn son often held specific rights to the estate and was absolutely central to a family's future. So Isaac's birth at this specific time, especially given the ages of Abraham and Sarah, wasn't just a happy family event. It was the very foundation of God's unfolding covenant plan. It ensured the lineage through which his promises would be fulfilled, the lineage that would eventually lead to the Messiah. This miracle established the divine choice, demonstrating that God's plan unfolds not through human strength or natural ability, but through his supernatural power and faithfulness.
And that profound shift from disbelief to joy is captured perfectly in the meaning of Isaac's name itself. Sarah declared, "God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this will laugh with me. For who would have dreamed that I would ever have a baby? Yet I have given Abraham a son in his old age."
That laughter, it's key.
Remember, Sarah had initially laughed back in Genesis 18, but that was laughter of utter disbelief, maybe even a touch of cynical amusement when she first heard the promise.
Right, hiding behind the tent flap.
Exactly. Now, her laughter is totally transformed. It's sacred, overwhelming joy and profound gratitude. It's a complete shift from skepticism and, human incredulity to a full embrace of divine faithfulness and the sheer delight of God's perfect timing.
And this raises an important question, doesn't it? What does it mean for us today when our initial doubts, maybe our own internal laughter of disbelief about God's promises, ultimately turn into joyful fulfillment? Isaac's very name, which literally means laughter, encapsulates this entire journey from human incredulity to divine faithfulness.
That's powerful.
Now, typologically speaking, Isaac is a clear, powerful picture of Jesus Christ. And typology, just as a quick reminder, it's this method of biblical interpretation where earlier events or people or even institutions in the Old Testament foreshadow later realities, especially Christ and his redemptive work in the New Testament.
Okay, so how does Isaac's story specifically prefigure Jesus? What are the parallels?
Well, think about it. Just like Isaac, Jesus was miraculously born a long-awaited deliverer. Isaac's birth defied natural expectation and human possibility through Abraham and Sarah's advanced age. Just as Jesus' birth through the Virgin Mary signifies a pure, undeniable divine intervention completely outside the normal course of nature.
Right, both supernatural.
Exactly. Both births were at the set time appointed by God. Both brought laughter and hope to humanity, Isaac bringing joy to his parents, Jesus bringing ultimate joy and salvation to all who believe. Furthermore, Isaac was the only begotten son of promise to Abraham, the unique heir, much like Jesus is the only begotten son of God.
And then there's the later story.
Ah, yes. Later in Abraham's life, God asks him to offer Isaac as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. It's a profoundly harrowing event, but it's also a clear foreshadowing of God the Father offering his only son Jesus on a cross. On a hill, not far from that very same location, these parallels aren't coincidental. They feel like God's intricate design weaving his redemptive narrative throughout history.
Wow. Okay, so back to Genesis 21. As time went by, Isaac grew and was eventually weaned, marking a significant milestone in his early childhood. Abraham, in his customary generosity and just profound joy, threw a huge party, a great feast to celebrate this happy occasion.
A big celebration.
But think about the patience involved here, a century for the promise to fully manifest. Abraham was 75 when he first received the initial promise from God, and he was 100 when Isaac was finally born. We live in such a world of instant gratification, don't we? We expect immediate results for our efforts, immediate answers to our prayers, often a direct and immediate correlation between our desires and their fulfillment. This narrative truly stands in stark contrast to that modern sensibility.
It really does. This reminds us that God's timing is often vastly different from our own. And frequently, it demands a patience that feels almost impossible in our fast-paced, on-demand society. It strongly encourages us to trust in his perfect timing, even when faced with significant delays, apparent impossibilities, or prolonged periods of uncertainty. It's about cultivating that deep-rooted faith that can hold on to a promise for decades, literally decades, knowing it will be fulfilled not on our impatient schedule, but precisely on God's.
That's a challenge.
It really is. It challenges us to reflect. Are we truly willing to trust God and endure through the uncomfortable silence, the apparent impossibility, and the long wait? Knowing that he is working even when we don't see immediate results. Our instant gratification culture can make us so prone to anxiety and self-reliance rather than quiet trust in God's process.
And behind the scenes of this miraculous birth, there's this incredibly intense, unseen spiritual battle raging, isn't there? This wasn't just a family affair.
Absolutely not. The birth of Isaac marks an incredibly significant spiritual breakthrough in God's redemptive plan. This long-promised heir represents the very lineage through which the Messiah would eventually come. It's the securing of the seed of Abraham, a crucial step in the unfolding of salvation history.
The seed?
Yes. And the devil, from the very beginning, has sought to thwart God's plans. We see this with Adam and Eve, with Cain and Abel, and certainly throughout Abraham's journey.
So you can easily imagine the unseen forces just swirling around this event. Satan, the adversary, had previously tried to sabotage God's redemptive plan through Abraham's fear, right? Like in earlier chapters when Abraham tried to pass Sarah off as his sister, putting the promised lineage at risk.
Twice, in fact.
And he also tried through Sarah's own impatience and scheme with Hagar, which produced Ishmael, an illegitimate heir in the eyes of the covenant. These were all attempts to introduce confusion or derail the divinely appointed line.
Definitely. Attempts to muddy the waters, so to speak. But now, with Isaac's birth, the true seed was secured, alive, and thriving. This birth was a direct, powerful counterpunch to any spiritual opposition attempting to corrupt or stop God's redemptive plan through Abraham's line. It was a decisive victory in the spiritual realm, ensuring the continuation of the divine promise against all odds.
So the enemy's efforts to prevent the birth of the Christ, millennia before he arrived, had been thwarted in this critical moment.
In this generation, yes, a major setback for the adversary.
Okay, but the profound joy of Isaac's birth is quickly shadowed by conflict, as so often happens when great blessings arrive. The catalyst for the next dramatic turn in the story is a deeply uncomfortable scene. Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant Hagar, making fun of Isaac, or mocking him, depending on the translation.
Yes, the Hebrew word sachak can mean laughing, playing, or mocking. Context is key.
And Sarah's reaction was immediate, absolute, and to our modern sensibilities, it feels quite shocking. She turned to Abraham and demanded, "Get rid of that servant and her son. He's not going to share the family inheritance with my son Isaac. I won't have it."
It sounds harsh, doesn't it? But to fully grasp Sarah's intense reaction, we need to understand the social hierarchy and legal customs of the ancient Near East. In that culture, while a slave woman could indeed bear children for her master, and those children might even be legally recognized to some extent, her child, especially an older one like Ishmael was, could, under certain circumstances, pose a legitimate threat to the legitimate wife's child's inheritance and standing.
Ah, okay, so it wasn't just jealousy.
Well, there was probably jealousy involved, let's be honest. But it wasn't just personal pique, it was a deeply legal, emotional, and existential threat to Isaac's position as the sole heir of the promise. The potential for conflict over inheritance was a very real and serious concern that often led to disputes and even violence. Sarah was protecting Isaac's God-given destiny.
And that phrase, making fun of Isaac or mocking him, was that just innocent child's play, some simple sibling rivalry, or was there something deeper and more spiritually charged going on? Because Sarah's reaction seems incredibly disproportionate if it was just innocent teasing between boys.
That's the crucial question. Was Ishmael's mocking just innocent play, or was it something more profound, something carrying a spiritual charge? The Apostle Paul's later interpretation in Galatians chapter 4, verse 29, strongly suggests it was a form of persecution. He explicitly says, "The son born according to the flesh persecuted the one born by the power of the Spirit."
Persecute.
Yes. This implies it wasn't just adolescent mischief, it carried a deeper spiritual hostility. It was a manifestation of the ongoing conflict between human effort, Ishmael's birth, and divine promise, Isaac's birth, between the flesh and the spirit. It resonates deeply with the very first murder we see in the biblical narrative, Cain killing Abel, where a rejection of God's ways led to hostility within the very first family. Ishmael, born of human impatience, and Sarah's scheme to help God's promise along, represented the flesh trying to supplant or mock the spirit, the one born purely by divine intervention.
Okay, that adds a whole different layer to it. Now, Abraham, understandably, was deeply distressed by Sarah's demand, because Ishmael was, after all, his son, his firstborn. The text says this was incredibly grievous in his sight. To send away his son, whom he'd raised for, 14 years or so by then, and Hagar, the mother of his son, it was an agonizing decision for a father.
Truly agonizing.
But God intervened, telling Abraham, "Do not be upset over the boy and your servant wife. Do just as Sarah says. For Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted, but I will make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he also is your son." This must have been such a difficult directive to hear, but God's clarity was paramount.
Absolutely. And this is a profound paradox of God's character, showcasing both divine justice and incredible mercy simultaneously. On one hand, there's a divine justice. The line of promise through Isaac must remain pure, unpolluted by human efforts to force God's hand or create alternatives.
Right, the covenant line.
Ishmael, born of human impatience and self-effort back in Genesis 16 when Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham. He simply cannot share in the inheritance of the son of promise. This clarifies that God's plan of salvation comes through his supernatural provision, not through human striving or self-will. It's a necessary, though painful, surgical separation to preserve the integrity of the covenant line that would eventually lead to Christ. God's holiness demands that the chosen line remains distinct and pure, unmixed with human attempts to help him.
But on the other hand, God's mercy shines through so powerfully. He acknowledges Ishmael as Abraham's son and promises to make a great nation from him, promising his presence and protection. He doesn't just abandon them.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder that God sees and cares for all, even those outside the immediate covenant line of promise through Isaac. Even when human choices lead to difficult outcomes, God's compassion and broader plan are still at work, extending grace beyond the strict boundaries of covenant election. This shows us that God's care extends beyond those who are chosen in a specific covenant sense. He is intimately involved in the lives and destinies of all his creation, providing for their needs and even elevating them according to his purposes.
So Abraham, though heavy-hearted, obeyed. He rose early the next morning, prepared food and water, strapped them to Hagar's shoulders, and sent her away with Ishmael. Imagine the despair. She wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba, a harsh and unforgiving landscape.
This desolate.
When the water was completely gone, the situation became absolutely dire. She left the boy under a bush, maybe to shield him from the scorching sun in his final moments, and then sat about 100 yards away crying, saying, "I don't want to watch the boy die." It's a scene of utter, gut-wrenching despair.
It's heartbreaking. And this image of Hagar at her absolute wit's end, feeling completely helpless, is profoundly relatable for us today, isn't it? We've all been in situations where we feel utterly helpless, seeing no way out, despairing for ourselves or those we love.
Definitely.
We've reached the very end of our own resources, and all we can do is cry out in anguish, lamenting our circumstances, feeling completely abandoned, whether by people or even feeling abandoned by God. It's that moment where you truly feel you have nothing left to give, nothing left to try.
Yeah. And what's truly fascinating here is God's timing.
Yeah.
He often allows us to exhaust all our own resources, doesn't he? To reach the very end of our human capacity before he intervenes.
It seems so. This teaches us deep, profound dependence and reminds us that his provision can come when we least expect it, or perhaps more accurately, when we are most despondent and have nowhere else to turn. It's a powerful testament to the power of lament and prayer, even when we can't articulate our pleas perfectly. Even when we're just sobbing uncontrollably and have no words left, God hears. He listens to the cries of the marginalized, the rejected, and the hopeless, even when they're not part of the primary covenant line. This is a God who sees the hidden pain and hears the silent cries.
And he did hear. The narrative tells us, then God heard the boy's cries. Notice the boy's cries. And the angel of God called to Hagar from the sky, "Hagar, what's wrong? Oh, do not be afraid. God has heard the boy's cries from the place where you laid him. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants."
Amazing grace.
Then, in a moment of pure divine grace, God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well. She immediately filled her container and gave the boy a drink, bringing life back to them both.
This just highlights God's incredible compassion for the marginalized and outcast. Even when cast out of Abraham's household, driven into the wilderness, Hagar and Ishmael are not invisible to God. And the very name Ishmael literally means God hears, doesn't it? This scene perfectly embodies that meaning.
Wow, I never connected that so directly. God hears the boy's cries.
Exactly. It's a powerful demonstration that God's love and provision extend even beyond the immediate covenant boundaries, foreshadowing the gospel's reach to all nations eventually. This isn't just a story about the chosen line, it's a profound statement about God's universal care and concern for humanity, even for those whose paths diverge from the direct line of promise.
And the well appearing right at the moment Hagar's eyes were opened is incredibly striking. So what deeper meaning does this hold for us today? Was the well always physically there right in front of them, but she simply couldn't see it until God intervened and opened her eyes?
It certainly seems possible, doesn't it? It's a powerful metaphor for the unseen blessings and provisions God has already placed in our lives. But we might be too overwhelmed by our circumstances, too despondent, or too focused on our immediate despair to perceive them.
Yeah, blinded by the situation.
Precisely. It teaches us to fear not, even in desperate situations, because God's provision can be closer than we imagine. It's a reminder that sometimes our spiritual vision is clouded by our emotional state, and we need divine intervention to truly see the resources God has already provided.
And despite being outside the direct covenant line of promise through Isaac, Ishmael still had a purpose and a destiny, and God was distinctly with him. The text tells us, "And God was with the boy as he grew up in the wilderness of Paran. He became an expert archer, and his mother arranged a marriage for him with a young woman from Egypt."
Right. This not only shows God's continued care for Hagar and Ishmael, providing for their needs and guiding their lives, but also foreshadows God's broader concern for all nations. And it sets the stage for future interactions, and unfortunately often conflicts, between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, a dynamic that has shaped history and continues to resonate today. Even when one path is chosen for a specific covenant purpose, God's hand is still clearly at work in the lives of everyone.
Okay, now this is where the story truly becomes a living parable for our own spiritual lives, isn't it? The Apostle Paul, in his powerful letter to the Galatians, unpacks this incredibly rich allegory, offering profound insight into the constant struggle within us.
Indeed, he does. Paul explains that Hagar and Ishmael represent the Old Covenant, the law, and the efforts of human flesh to achieve God's promises through self-effort and rule-keeping. This is the idea of trying to earn God's favor or salvation through our own good works, our own striving, our own obedience to rules and regulations.
Works-based righteousness.
Exactly. Isaac and Sarah, in stark contrast, represent the new covenant, grace, and the supernatural fulfillment of God's word purely through faith, by his power alone. The mockery Ishmael directed Isaac, which Paul calls persecution, symbolizes the ongoing internal conflict between those who rely on self-effort and legalism and those who embrace God's unmerited grace and the power of the Spirit. It's a continuous spiritual battle within each of us, the flesh warring against the Spirit.
So when we translate this profound allegory to our modern day, what does this all mean for us? Are we, in our daily lives and spiritual pursuits, subconsciously or even overtly trying to earn God's favor through our own works and efforts, through religious performance, or through our own self-improvement? Or are we fully embracing the freedom and inheritance that come purely through God's unmerited grace, through faith in what Christ has already accomplished for us? This reminds us that true freedom, true peace, and our spiritual inheritance come through faith in what God has done, not through what we can accomplish.
And it raises an important question. Are we, in our modern pursuit of self-sufficiency, achievement, and even self-help, inadvertently relying on human effort and striving, rather than surrendering completely to God's grace and allowing him to work miraculously in our lives? The text, through Sarah's demand and God's affirmation, tells us, "Cast out the bondwoman and her son." Paul interprets this not as an act of arbitrary cruelty, but as a deep spiritual truth and covenant clarity.
Clarity, that's the word.
Yes, there can be no mixture of law and grace as means of salvation or spiritual inheritance in the kingdom of God. Only one son inherits the promise, the son born of promise, not of flesh, not of human effort. And if we belong to Christ, then we are children of that promised lineage born not of the will of flesh, but purely of the Spirit. This means actively denying the impulse to earn what has been freely given, and instead resting in the finished work of Christ.
This entire narrative, especially the conflict within Abraham's household leading to the separation, it just hints at an intense, unseen spiritual battle that was constantly pushing against God's plan.
Oh, absolutely. While explicit mentions of demonic influence are not made, the text is saturated with spiritual tension and opposition. Satan had previously tried multiple times to sabotage God's promise through Abraham's fear, prompting him to lie about Sarah.
Putting the lineage at risk.
Exactly. He also exploited Sarah's scheme with Hagar in Genesis 16, which birthed Ishmael, an illegitimate heir. These were direct attacks on the promised seed. Now, with Isaac's miraculous birth, the enemy seems to shift tactics. He stirs conflict within the household, exploiting Sarah's fear and Ishmael's mocking to sow discord and division precisely where joy and unity should reign.
Ah, the internal attack.
It's a classic strategy of the adversary. If you can't stop God's promise from being born, try to corrupt it or destroy it from within through internal conflict and division.
It's almost like the enemy thought. If I can't stop the true promise from being born, I'll try to corrupt it from within. Or create so much conflict that it destroys itself, perhaps through bloodshed or fracturing the very family meant to carry the covenant. It's the very same battle we face today in our own lives and communities, when the flesh mocks the spirit, when legalism resents grace, when counterfeit voices or self-righteousness challenge true faith that is rooted in God's provision and not our own efforts.
It's a constant struggle to discern and resist those influences that seek to disrupt the peace and joy that should accompany living by God's promises, often through subtle internal pressures rather than overt external attacks.
Okay, so transitioning now from the intense internal family drama, the chapter closes with Abraham navigating external relationships. About this time, Abimelech, the powerful king of Gerar, came with Phicol, his army commander, to visit Abraham. And Abimelech's opening statement is a truly powerful testament to Abraham's life and walk with God. He says, "It is clear that God helps you in everything you do."
Think about that. This is a pagan king recognizing divine favor on Abraham, observing his prosperity and protection.
It's huge.
It really is. And it raises an important question for us in the modern world. Does our life, our integrity, our actions, and even our success similarly demonstrate God's tangible presence and favor to the world around us? It's a powerful reminder that our consistent walk with God, our obedience, and the way we conduct our affairs can profoundly influence how others perceive and interact with us, encouraging peace rather than conflict, and drawing them to recognize the source of our blessing. Our lives are meant to be a testimony, aren't they? A beacon that points to the God who is with us.
Yeah. When a non-believer can observe our lives and conclude that God helps you in everything you do, that's a profound witness. But recognition of God's favor doesn't mean all problems vanish. Abimelech immediately requests an oath from Abraham. He says, "Swear to me in God's name that you won't deceive me, my children, or my grandchildren. I have been loyal to you. So now swear that you will be loyal to me and to this country in which you are living." Abraham replied, "All right, I swear to it."
A formal treaty.
Then, right after this agreement, Abraham surprisingly complained to Abimelech about a well that Abimelech's servants had violently taken from Abraham's servants. Abimelech claimed ignorance and asked why Abraham hadn't said something about it before. It seems Abraham was waiting for the right moment, maybe the moment of leverage, to address this significant grievance.
Well, and historically, water was literally life in this arid region of Canaan. Access to water determined where you could live, how large your flocks could be, and whether you could survive. A well was an incredibly precious, vital resource, often worth fighting and dying over.
Okay, so this wasn't just a minor squabble.
Not at all. It wasn't a trivial property dispute. It was a huge deal, a matter of survival, sustenance, and clearly established property rights. This scene teaches us the importance of clarifying boundaries and firmly yet peaceably reclaiming what is rightfully ours. Abraham, despite being a sojourner and technically a guest in the land, was firm in asserting his rights, showing that pursuing peace also involves establishing clear and honest boundaries and not letting grievances fester.
Good point.
And, well, it also symbolizes so much more, doesn't it? It represents vital sustenance, God's provision, the source of truth, and metaphorically, the living water offered through Jesus Christ, which brings eternal life. Disputed wells often represent contention over spiritual truth and provision.
So, to formalize this peace and resolve the dispute over the well, Abraham gave sheep and oxen to Abimelech, and they made a treaty, a covenant. Then Abraham also took 7 additional ewe lambs and set them off by themselves. When Abimelech asked why, Abraham said, "They are my gift to you as a public confirmation that I dug this well." So that place has been known ever since as Beersheba, which literally means well of the oath, because that was where they had sworn an oath.
Yeah.
This was a very specific symbolic act of solidifying their agreement.
Yes, and the 7 ewe lambs are highly significant. The number 7, as we know, often symbolizes completeness, perfection, or divine order in Scripture, adding a deeper layer of meaning to this covenant.
Complete.
This act formalized their agreement and mutual respect, and typologically, you could say, it prefigures the ultimate peace Christ brings between God and humanity through his perfect sacrifice. It also serves as a strong reminder for believers of the call to live peaceably and honorably with others in the world, establishing clear boundaries and respecting agreements, even with those outside our immediate faith community. This was a covenant of peace and mutual respect, built on integrity and a shared recognition of Abraham's God-given blessing.
And this successful covenant allowed Abraham to live in Philistine country for a long time. So what does this all mean for Abraham's overall journey? It reveals Abraham's growing status and influence in the region. He was becoming a respected figure, a man to be reckoned with, even by powerful kings like Abimelech.
His reputation was growing.
Yeah, his reputation was clearly tied to the recognition that God was tangibly with him, confirming the promises God had made. He had gone from being just a wandering nomad to a respected leader whose word was trusted, even by foreign potentates.
A significant shift. Now, after making their covenant, Abimelech and Phicol returned home to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham did something significant. He planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and he worshipped the Lord, calling on El-Olam, the eternal God, at that place.
El-Olam.
Yes. The act of planting a tree, a long-lasting, deep-rooted symbol of life and permanence in an arid land, and calling on El-Olam, the everlasting God, is a profound statement of Abraham's faith. El-Olam emphasizes God's unchanging, unending, and faithful character. It's a significant shift from interacting with human king to acknowledging God's eternal faithfulness and his unchanging character, recognizing his hand in both the miraculous birth of Isaac and the preservation and peace of his household. It establishes a lasting memorial to God's enduring presence and reminds us that our worship should be rooted in God's eternal nature.
And this brings us back full circle, doesn't it, to the central theme of God's unwavering faithfulness. Even after the stress of the well dispute, the complexities of negotiating and making a covenant with a worldly king, Abraham immediately returns to worship, anchoring himself and his household in the eternal nature of God. It's a powerful lesson that amidst all the complexities and compromises of life, the difficult choices, the external negotiations, the daily challenges, our ultimate allegiance, our deepest gratitude, and our primary source of strength should always lead us back to El-Olam, the everlasting God, the one who never changes.
Well said. But here's where we find a subtle, yet potentially deeply significant allegorical warning that carries profound weight for our modern spiritual lives. The text states, almost as an aside, and Abraham sojourned in Philistine country for a long time.
Okay.
This connection to the Philistines is not just a geographical detail, nor is it necessarily a benign one. Later in history, the Philistines become a recurring, persistent adversary for Israel, embodying a constant source of conflict and temptation.
Right, like with Samson, David, and Goliath.
Exactly. Throughout the biblical narrative, they often represent the flesh in a symbolic sense, our fallen human nature, self-will, and worldly systems that oppose God's ways. They were always a thorn in Israel's side, representing the unholy influence that constantly threatened God's people.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture for our modern day, you could almost say Abraham, in this instance, made a kind of covenant with the flesh.
Right.
Or with a worldly power. Perhaps without fully inquiring of God in this specific detail, relying more on diplomacy than divine counsel.
It's possible interpretation, a caution, perhaps.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for us today? It raises the important question. Are there areas in our own lives where we might compromise or make alliances with the flesh? Our self-will, our own desires, worldly systems, or convenient compromises that could lead to future conflict? Or spiritual dryness? Or subtly distract us from God's full and perfect purpose for us? It challenges us to reflect on those smiling faces that might not truly be our spiritual friends in our journey, and the constant daily need to deny the flesh if we are truly serving God and pursuing His perfect will. It's a reminder that even good intentions or seemingly practical alliances can lead to unintended consequences when we don't fully seek God's counsel and align with His uncompromising truth. It's a subtle warning against making peace with aspects of our lives or the world that will inevitably become an adversary to our spiritual growth later on.
That's a sobering thought to end on for that section. Okay, so we've journeyed through Genesis chapter 21, a chapter filled with miraculous births against all odds, heart-wrenching separations, and these complex covenants. We saw Sarah's laughter transform from initial doubt to overwhelming joy, Hagar's desperate cry being heard by a compassionate God in the wilderness, and Abraham's shrewd diplomacy alongside his profound, anchoring worship of El Olam, the eternal God. This deep dive really reveals that God's grand plan unfolds amidst human imperfections, our own impatience, and the persistent, unseen spiritual challenges that continually try to thwart His purposes.
Yeah, it does. And this deep dive leaves us with several important questions to ponder in our own lives, doesn't it? How do we, in our modern context, navigate the inherent tension between patiently waiting on God's perfect timing and the almost irresistible urge to take matters into our own hands and force our own solutions, much like Abraham and Sarah did initially with Hagar?
That impatience.
How do we clearly identify the mockery of the flesh in our own lives, those internal impulses or external influences that subtly undermine or scorn God's grace, and truly embrace the freedom and power of His grace alone? And how do we ensure that our covenants, be they personal relationships, professional agreements, or spiritual commitments, are truly aligned with the everlasting God's will, and not just convenient worldly alliances that might later prove to be spiritual adversaries?
These are critical questions. This deep dive really reinforces that God's promises are absolutely sure, even against all odds. His compassion extends far beyond our human expectations and conventional boundaries, reaching the outcast and the despairing. And His truth demands clarity and no compromise, especially when it comes to the path of salvation and true spiritual inheritance. The story challenges us to look beyond the surface of our circumstances and recognize the spiritual dynamics at play, reminding us that there is always more going on than meets the eye.
Absolutely, and maybe consider this as you go about your day. Just as Isaac's miraculous, divinely appointed arrival necessitated the difficult, yet divinely directed, removal of Ishmael from Abraham's immediate household to ensure the purity and clarity of the promised lineage, so too does the arrival of Christ in our hearts and lives demand the removal of every rival, every vestige of pride, works righteousness, legalism, and the persistent demands of the flesh. Are we truly living as children of the free woman, fully embracing the grace that has been freely given? Or are we still trying, in some subtle way, perhaps unconsciously, to earn what has already been paid for by Christ? This is the core spiritual battle that Genesis 21 illuminates for us, even today.